Hey everybody, welcome back to the Audiomo Podcast. I know we had last week off due to scheduling issues. That's life when you have kids and jobs. But I'm joined again with my co-host, Mr. Dave Nelson. How are you doing tonight, Dave?
Oh, pretty good. You know, it's been a week. Been a week.
I know. I just assumed something to be nitpicking about when I ask you that question. Like, oh, something didn't go quite perfect, and
You know what? Actually, this week is this week, right? I started a new job, or like with a new team a couple weeks ago. So, I'm sort of like slowly easing into things, and it's fine. It's actually been going really well. But I'm happy for the weekend. I saw the Batman today, and it exceeded expectations, and so I'm in a good mood.
that's good. And that's another thing of just throw a "the" in front of something that's already been done 1,000 times, and it could be reborn and rebranded, little effort as necessary. And that's not to say the movie's bad. I don't know that. I'm just saying I think it's funny that they just keep doing this with all these kinds of movies. But speaking of new, you sent me your first mixes that you got back from the engineer, and we were talking a little bit about how you wanted to be evolving as far as the sound of your band. Now, what I want to start here is kind of for you to kind of lay the foundation for the people who don't know. What I'm going to do is also in the description of this video, I'm going to link some of the really early stuff that you guys have posted on YouTube, and then just kind of like gradually, like I'll have like years dated with it so you can see the natural kind of progression. And then we'll talk about, where things are headed and how you feel about it and why you made the decisions that you've made to get to this place you're at now.
Yeah. So, this is tough. It's been we had kind of a cool break here where we were sort of waiting on mixes back, where for the first time in, I don't know, maybe like 2 years now, I didn't listen to the tracks at all. So I got this kind of nice month and a half long break of not thinking about these new tracks at all. And I got some mixes back a couple days ago. And we're super happy with the first round of mixes, but it starts to make you think about kind of like where you've been and what you've done and where you're going. And, I don't know, occasionally we listen to the old stuff and I'm like, man, these are decisions that I wouldn't have made. And, I think anybody who's going to listen to them sort of on first run is maybe going to think like, hey, these are simpler, right? And I think this kind of brings me to this sort of like age old kind of musician question of, the next record is simpler, but we call it more mature, or we say it's subtler in its songwriting, and like, what does that really mean, right? Like, is simpler better, and is simpler more mature? And I think the context is really important, right? To me, a great example of this is, and I think we've actually talked about this on the podcast before. I love BT Bam, right? Between the Buried and Me. My favorite record of theirs, though, is Coma Ecliptic, which to me feels like the most mature record that they have. And part of that is because it's simpler, but I think it's something broader and it's something bigger, and it's more along the lines of the songwriting feeling more cohesive. And so, I think that's really what we're going for with the new stuff, right? Is that it's supposed to be, all of these parts have intention and they're moving from one thing to the next on purpose, and they're doing these things for a very specific reason. Whereas in the past, maybe we were just going like, hey, we got to get from this to this, like what's the mathiest way to do that, right? Or what's some weird thing we can toss in between, and we were constantly like breaking momentum and sort of just throwing things in there for the sake of throwing things in there. And that being said, there are ways to do that maturely, and there are ways to do that simply. I will say I don't think we were doing them that way. We were kind of doing them for the sake of us doing them, but I don't know. I'm curious, when you think simple music and maturity in music, like, are those two things that go together necessarily? Are they mutually exclusive? Are they, mutually paired? Like, I always think about the example of like the next record being the mature record because it's like more simple. And I don't think that's always true, but it kind of feels like there are a lot of great examples of it. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. The first one, I don't know why this is what pops in my head, kind of defies part of that and goes along with it's more simple, so to speak. But I think it's a good example because a lot of people will know this band and know these two records, and it's Weezer. When you start with the Blue album, there's nothing technical on that. That's as pretty much straight up as it gets with the power chords and the actual writing and all of that. Pinkerton comes along, and that's, a lot of people that listen to Weezer, they'll say that's their favorite record, regardless, and that's, I like that record a lot too. But when you actually break it down from a songwriting standpoint and stuff like that, I mean, it didn't get simpler. You know what I'm saying? Like, it didn't mature in that way. It seemed more like, I don't know. I feel like they were going in a direction of they were really stressed out. That's kind of the vibe I got from that record. Like, all the success that they had from that first record kind of influenced like them not caring like so much about like the pop side of it, and just like really like, I don't know. It's like, I think the reason why that record is so endearing to a lot of people is because it's kind of dark. And when you associate like a band like Weezer, because the next record that comes out after that's the Green Album, that's poppy as hell. There's nothing poppier than that. Well, besides like Gratitude, but that album was garbage. And that sucks too, because one of my favorite producers, Butch Walker, produced that record. But I mean, the point being here, I think that there's a lot of ways to look at maturity. Going back to the kind of the fulcrum of this conversation, I think it does depend on the band. Really, it depends on the band, and where the band starts has a lot to do with it, because when you're starting young and you're starting like with the same group of people, you're obviously not going to be as good as your instruments as you're going to eventually get. So you might be somewhat limited in that aspect. So the next record might be better on, a more mature as far as, maybe they learned some theory and learned, some cool modulation and stuff like that. Or just technically, they might just be better players, But you also have the other side of it where everybody might be awesome and you start the band already way ahead of the curve from like, those kind of situations that I just mentioned. And so it's easier then to judge like, okay, all these guys are obviously competent and really good at their instruments. Maybe the first record's just like they're all excited. There's all this energy. They want to try all these things from projects that they didn't get to do before. So it kind of like might be a little overwhelming. So the next record might seem super simple because they're working more cohesively as a unit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think, when I start to think about songwriting, a lot of times, obviously my day job is a designer, right? So a lot of times I think about music in similar terms, like, and, when we were doing lots of design work in school, or even, my first couple of jobs that I had where, I was really learning a lot. I think one of the core kind of design principles is, get your idea out, put everything there, and then strip away everything that isn't necessary. And you bring it down to it's, just the core pieces of like what is translating in this design. Like you're looking at something and every line in there has some sort of purpose, right? And I think music is the same way. That's what we really tried to do with this record. And I think that's probably what happens a lot when you get to these guys who are 4 or 5 records in or whatever, and they're just going like, okay, we're done with the superfluous crap. We're just down to what's this song? What do these pieces need to be? And what am I trying to convey with these pieces, right? And then at the end of the day, you figure out like, I don't need a stupid solo on everything. Like, or yeah, we don't need this weird breaky transition thing, or like the syncopation piece in between does stop me from really rocking into the next part, right? And like I said, there are mature ways to do those things, and I think that there are records that prove against this rule here that I'm sort of saying. But I think when you really just rip out everything and you kind of come back to what is the song doing, the thing that feels mature about it is getting rid of all the excess crap that was only there maybe for ego or for trial or whatever.
Yeah, I totally can feel what you're saying with that. And I've listened to the record, and what sucks here is they're not going to be able to hear the new stuff right now, obviously, because it's not finished. I get sent this stuff because we're friends, and you asked my opinion on this, but I can hear a little bit more of this maturity that you were talking about. And that was one thing that I said, and there was a lot of times where, in certain other records, not just with you, but I listen back to old stuff I did. A lot of the times I would think about a part and I would say, that didn't need to be there. You know what I mean? Like, I wish, why did I jam that in there? And now I think it's almost more endearing when it's almost like a little piece is like missing because you expect it, but it's almost like surprising when it's not there. And that leads me into the second question I want to ask you specifically here, because this is something that other people may go through or have gone through. I'd like your perspective on it. You originally always had two guitarists. You were always kind of the main rhythm guitarist. There was a lot of the times in the songs you weren't even playing the guitar. You would just kind of sit there and you'd be doing the singing, and then, when the chorus comes in, you chug along with it. But from the perspective of not just that part where you have to play the guitar the full time, but also not having, because this record has like no guitar solos on it. I want kind of your take on your decision making for doing that, and how you felt about switching from having that second kind of person to rely on for the songwriting and filling things out, and then doing it all entirely on your own.
So it's interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, because there is actually one spot in one of the tracks where we did have a guitar solo that we didn't just axe the whole piece entirely. And we went back and forth a bunch of times on kind of what to do there. Like originally I did a guitar solo, and, we had the rhythm guitar cut out right for me to do the solo. And that's a problem because it just kind of like sucks all the energy out of the spot, right? When you're going from big thick chords into like a solo with just bass. Sometimes you can pull it off depending on, the right spot, but it wasn't working here, right? So then we were like, okay, maybe we'll try to do sort of like a leady rhythm thing or whatever, and that didn't really work. And then we kind of ended up landing on doing sort of this extension of the chord progression that was already going with some strings and stuff on top of it, right? And really the only reason that we didn't just cut it was because, to get to kind of your question here, right? We had like built the section going into this solo, right? Like there's like a vocal thing that went into it, like the energy just pushed there. And for me, like a solo really, unless it's serving the purpose of the song, shouldn't be there anyway, right? And I mean, I know there's a lot of guitar players that really like to do that. It's kind of their stamp. It's their time to, go off and show off, and usually in a way that's not like, oh, they're just showing off, like they fit into songs, right? But they have to be earned, I think, right? Like, and our music in particular, I think at least this time around, doesn't have a lot of places where we are looking for it, so we're not trying to build to earn it, right? And in this one place we did. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that it's been an adjustment to kind of be the only person that's being relied on for that space, and it's been a whole new way of thinking, to be honest. I mean, I can't, my old excuse was just that I'm not very good at guitar, right? And which is, still kind of my go-to excuse is that I'm not very good at guitar. I use it as a vehicle to write music, right? And that's kind of what my reason for always wanting a second guitar player was it's like, hey, I'm not that good at this. Like, I don't want to be the one who's like out in front of this, right? I'm gonna let somebody else take that position. And it's been super difficult to kind of go like, okay, it's just me now, right? And I mean, I'd be totally lying if I wasn't saying that I'm still totally like afraid of doing shows by myself and being like, hey, if I fuck up, like it's only gonna be me. Everybody's gonna know it's me fucking up, and like there's nothing to hide behind. But it's weird unexplored space, as far as the writing stuff goes, it's just been a learning curve, of trying to figure out, what to do with all this open space. So I think I maybe missed one of your questions in there, but I probably hit a lot of stuff.
You hit fair enough of an amount of it where I kind of got the gist of what you're saying. It's interesting to me because I've always been the opposite. So I like looking at things from other people's perspectives. I've always been the guitar player, period. And it didn't matter who I was playing with, you know what I mean? And it was just me. So that's always been something where, like, I don't know. And I'm kind of the same way with solos. And I think part of the reason why I didn't progress as a lead guitarist was because I didn't want the songs to be about that. And I also kind of felt similar to what you just said. It's just like, I don't want them to focus on me. Like, I want them to focus on the song and stuff like that. And I mean, part of that is down to where you're at as a guitar player, having the confidence of being able to do things. Because what I've come to learn now is, like, I've become an infinitely better lead player than I was. And it has nothing to do with chops. It just has to do with really understanding where things work and why things work as far as the lead goes, because there's a lot of really great lead players that don't hit a lot of notes. Like, you don't need to be a great, shredder or anything like that. Like, the little runs are fine, and I do them too. Like, it's cool, it adds something, and it's always like, oh wow, that's really fast. It's like, yeah, but that's not what it's about. Like, you have to be at such a level to get away with that on a regular basis. Like, you have to be like a Marty Friedman or a Gary Moore, because they're able to still invoke emotion when they do it. And that's something where I've never felt confident enough in my playing to like just go transition from like that crazy style of leads to whatever. So I find I look at it like you do, and granted, we play in different genres. We kind of approach guitar differently. Like, I've played guitar more seriously longer than you have. So I mean, but at the end of the day, we have a very similar kind of outlook towards it. And I think that that's something that, I really appreciate. And I think that's pretty cool. And that kind of leads me into the second kind of talking point here, getting off of your specific stuff. I saw something, speaking of awesome guitar players, Phil X, and he was commenting, because I guess, I'm not sure the whole story here, I'm just going based off of what Phil said. Apparently, Lenny Kravitz is looking for another guitar player, and it's one of those things where there's auditions and stuff, and people are posting all their auditions, and it's a bunch of people posting, as fast as they can play, the most technical sweeping and all this stuff, and Phil is just like, he's like not having it, because he's just like, you don't get it. He's like, the lead guitarist, he's like, all you kids, he's like, you don't get it. That's not what music is about. That's not what this kind of music is about. This is not about jamming in your bedroom, showing off how big your dick is. Like, he didn't say that, but like, really, you could tell, like, that's kind of what he's getting at here. It's just like, it's just so sad to see it like this. And I as somebody who does this as a platform, I feel like there's a big gap. I feel like there's a gap of like people who are like barely competent and like play like really routine stuff, and that's cool, just like when they're doing demos and stuff. And then there's like the other end of the spectrum where they're so technically good that it's like almost intimidating to somebody watching the demo, and you might even just like lose focus on the product or the guitar or whatever it is and just like focus on the playing. Whereas like there's like that kind of middle ground style of player, you know what I mean, where it's like that kind of mix of both. So I feel like if you're not in one of those camps, it's kind of difficult, and most people just assume you have to go to the other end of it, where you have to be like this shredder or this crazy technical guitar player to get recognized. And I think that that's the wrong way to look at things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's weird to even think that somebody who's playing that way would audition for Kravitz. Like, I really like Lenny Kravitz quite a bit, and I think his guitar playing is phenomenal. And especially for when it was and what he was doing. Like, I think he's just doing really cool stuff, right? And I mean, you listen to his music and you can tell he's not looking for a shredder, so I'm sure he's not paying attention to them either. But to kind of circle back to, right, like, when we were talking about, and I think this sort of proves your point, right? Like, we're talking about solos and those types of things and those technical types of players. Like, just ironically, one of my favorite solos of all time is off of Pinkerton, and it's on Why Bother, right? And the whole thing's like, it's like 6 notes. It's just super fun, but like what it does is it's moving you from one piece to the other while like ramping the energy up and then bringing it down to kind of, cool back again for the third verse or whatever it is, right? And I mean, that's the kind of thing that it's like, that's what's going to jump out, right? And obviously River, if is it Rivers doing the solo on that track? I probably not. It's probably the other guy who I never remember his name, but I mean, they're not amazing players, right? But like, they know what they're doing with the feelings and with the intention of the song, right? And so like, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I would be curious to see what type of person he's looking for, right? Like, and what type of person gets that gig. Cause like, anytime you see those videos where it's like, I think we talked about a couple podcasts back, like the guy who tours with Britney Spears, like, I'm sure that guy's a fantastic guitar player. He's just playing stuff for Britney Spears and he's just solid every night. That's the skill he's hired for, is that he's not the guy who's up there just shredding away. He's the guy who's up there consistently playing what the songs need every single night. Right. And like, that's a skill that's it's past the technical ability, right? It's time, it's dedication, it's a certain type of discipline, right? Like it's weird. It's like you would call it like a soft skill rather than a hard skill, right? Like it's not a technical ability. It's a personality trait almost, you know?
And I think it's a more important skill. And I think it's a harder skill to understand. And it's something that I'm going to be starting to explore this week. I'm starting to think like a drummer, believe it or not, because I feel like people do too much on guitar. And I think that by using the drums as a good example of not doing too much and thinking about like the really good drummers, you know, like the ones that really sit in the pocket and like have a really good groove to it, like they're not doing shit the majority of the time. They're literally just the backbone of it. And not many people look at the guitar as that instrument. They look at it like, I have to be playing all the strings. I have to be playing this many notes. And it's just like, no, you need to leave space. And answering your question on who he's looking for, I'm not going to say like this specific person, but there's two people that pop into my mind as far as like their theory on music and how they approach guitar and songwriting. It would be Tim Pierce or Corey Wong, because they know what's best for the arrangements. They know where things fit in, and they are just consummate professionals. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I don't know. I think that's a harder question in the rock world, like who does that kind of thing. Although Miles Kennedy kind of comes to mind, right? Like as a rhythm player for Alter Bridge, right? Like he's got Tremonti on his side, and he knows like he's got to shut up and let Tremonti be Tremonti on guitar, even though Miles is a fantastic guitar player as well as a fantastic singer. And so I think that, you know, there are or like we used to talk about all the time, the other dude from Sevenfold, not Gates, but Zachy Vengeance or whatever, right? He's just like as dumb as the stage name thing is. He is a world-class rhythm guitar player, right? Like he just knows when to like leave Sinister up to his own thing, right? And then they do the wheedly dueling solos and stuff. But my point being, there's definitely, it's a skill to learn, and it's difficult to wrap your head around, especially in a situation where where you're not playing with other people who are kind of challenging you in that way.
Yeah, and it's just the main point of this conversation. I think it can all be tied together with what's best for the song, not what's best for me, the guitar player, not what's best for me, the singer, not what's best for me, the guitarist, whatever it is. You have to look at things in the context of what's the best for the music for that specific situation and what exactly the vision of that piece of art is going to be. And that is the difference between writing something that's just, whatever. And, it's cool, great, whatever, you're technically great, or something that invokes an emotion out of somebody, because that's the trick to it. And that's why I stand so firmly behind, I don't understand how people can play guitar and not take theory at least somewhat seriously, because you're just handicapping yourself so much. It is so much easier to because a lot of the times, I don't know if this happens to you, but like this used to happen to me constantly. I would hear exactly what I wanted in my head when I wouldn't have my guitar on me, whether it's a solo or a lead line, or even a cheesy thing with the Why Bother. That's a perfect example of that too. Just a riff like that, I would hear it, but I wouldn't understand why it worked. And I would sit with the guitar and I could play it and it wouldn't be a problem or anything like that, but I wouldn't get why it worked. And because I didn't get that, it would limit the rest of the composition, because once you have the facilities to be able to understand why the things work, you're limitless. You could do so much more and just really paint a palette, and it doesn't take a lot. We're always so worried about, buying the next thing to make us sound better, but a lot of the times it's the stuff that you can't buy. You can't buy the practice. You can't buy it. Nobody's going to play your guitar for you. Nobody's going to study this stuff. It's boring. Some of it is boring. But if you don't do this stuff, then what the hell's the point?
Yeah, agreed. And I would say if anybody's listening and is intimidated by the theory stuff, it's really only, I think, a pretty basic knowledge, right? You don't have to dive into it. And I will say, if you're not doing it every day in the way that most of these studied musicians are doing it, you're never going to get there, right? And I actually think that's something that a lot of the theory guys out there don't really talk about, right? Like, we know theory guys, right? Like we know guys who do like literally do this every day. They sit down with sheet music and they play and they communicate with musicians in that way all the time, or they're, literally doing full on compositions and, programming and writing for multiple instruments and understanding how they work together and doing all those kinds of things. And if you're doing that every day, you will get that good, right? You will get to that level of understanding. Like me or you, like who's sitting and playing either by themselves or just with a band who is just playing in a room together and they're not working off of sheet music. Like, I'm never going to get to that point because I just don't do it every day, right? So like for me, the base level of understanding is more than enough, right? Like I understand how to build chords properly. I understand keys properly. I understand, timing to a decent degree. I understand most of those things, and that's enough for me to know what the rules are, when to break them, and why things do certain things. And like, I think when people really start getting into the theory stuff and they like see this unsurmountable amount of information, it's good to know that it's like you really don't need to get that deep. It's once you get kind of the basic level understanding, that should be enough to get you to the points that you need to as a songwriter to start understanding why things are happening, why you can break some of these rules, and why you can do cool things and why they're working, like you were saying.
Yes, and I think the foundation is you don't need to be a genius in theory, like you said. Because I'm certainly not a genius in theory. I'm ahead of a lot of people in that aspect, but it's not to say that I'm at the level of the people that you were mentioning. That like, because I can read sheet, but like I can't compose for a freaking orchestra or a proper like quartet or something like that, or a 3-string kind of arrangement like on a regular basis, and to do it like in an innovative way every time. No, I'm not doing that. But I think the thing that's the most interesting is, and where people will find the biggest breakthroughs, and where I found the biggest breakthroughs when I was going through, that painstaking process of really figuring out, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to figure this out as far as the theory goes. Once you master the basic things, the advanced things pop up on their own. The more you experiment, like once like even if you just understand intervals, it all just starts to make so much more sense. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I could just do this. And then you sound like you're way better than you normally, would come across, because it's a little bit of flavor. It's a little bit of something else. And that's the difference between like having your own sound and, just kind of sounding like a guy playing power chords, quite frankly. You know what I mean?
Right. Plus, especially if you're in the beginning of it, right? Like I find the most effective times to like mess with those things are when you're setting the stage for it not to do it, right? So like imagine just listening to a very basic pop song that suddenly has one weird thing in it, right? Like that one weird thing, if executed correctly, is so cool compared to an entire song of weird things, right? Like so I think, like, again, even just getting past that first step and then just going like, okay, yeah, it's cool to play the 4-chord progression that everybody's played a million times. But like if on the third one we do a key change to, like a parallel minor, right? Like that's not crazy. That's not weird. It's just subbing a major for a minor at one point to achieve some sort of effect. But you've laid this groundwork of like, no, this is just going to be a straightforward thing, right? And then like suddenly you're using advanced techniques that are really not that advanced, but they open up this whole new track of songwriting within something that's already familiar. So I just want to stress that it seems intimidating, especially when you look at some of these courses or books or things like that. And it's really just like, it's like knowing even pre-algebra is more important than trying to get all the way to like trig, right? Like, you know what I mean? That's probably not a good example, but the point being is like, if you have the basic understandings of it, like no one does trig other than mathematicians. No one does trig every day, but like you can look at it and not be intimidated by a bunch of letters, because like you at least understand pre-algebra.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Totally. And your take on you can play the same 4 chords as everybody else, but you throw in that little spice. That's all Saves the Day is. Saves the Day makes you, that's the bread and butter, but it works. It works because it'll catch you off guard because you're like, oh, I'm listening to a pop song, and all of a sudden a chord will pop up that just causes a lot of tension. They like augmented chords a lot. Well, Chris does, the writer of the band. You'll just hear a oddly spotted augmented chord right at the end, leading into the next section, and it kind of makes you go, ooh, well, like, whoa, what's going on here? This is not what I'm used to hearing. That's all it is. That's all this is. And then that is the baseline for building everything else off of that. And then you can figure out ways to implement that into something like a key change, or use a secondary dominate to modulate into something else. Like there's just so much you can do. And it's just, you have to be willing to take the first steps. That's all. I don't know how we somehow developed or I divulged this far into, the importance of knowing your theory, but I can't stress it enough. And you're on the same page with me. It's at least having a foundation is invaluable. Especially if you want to take this seriously. It's one thing to be a bedroom player and be happy getting better and playing chops and, learning your favorite solos and sounding like them and stuff like that. But to really hit that level of a writer yourself, I mean, not everybody's Stevie Ray Vaughan. As far as not being able to know theory, but he knew it without being able to speak it, if that makes sense. Like he got it up here and his hands were able to communicate with his brain. So for somebody like him, it works out. But I mean, not everybody's like that. You got to put in the work.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, Dave. Let's keep this to music tonight. Let's not talk about any gear. You got anything else you want to hit on while we're here?
No, I think we ranted for quite a while, and I got a band coming in this week to do some tracking, so I'm sure I'll have some good stories for next weekend. No, that's all I got, man.
Thank you guys for listening, as usual. Tomorrow, I believe we're going to be checking out the Harley Benton with the new pickups in it. That should be a lot of fun. I got a new pickguard for it, too. Really, really going bold here, guys. Really bold. You'll have to wait and see what I went with. But other than that, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you for next week's podcast, or I will see you tomorrow. Take it easy, everybody.